نستمر تقربنا تمكر أمس بصوت ما ألستهز بإرتاح تكافل عن مونغونا تاريخي وازلا قادت أنيان تقالاسيت محبرة فتحي هونت بسأيتي كامراد مارغريت كيمبرلي عن مونغونا لا نتقعيد كبلاينا دحر مجمريا نزوم بإنجليش دما مثلا من نسيات لكنا مهارو أو تمكرو أسفل. I will introduce our next speaker. It is with great honor and excitement that I introduce our speaker for today's conference session on the sustainability and independent media. As we gather here under the theme of successive generation for a bright future, it is essential to recognize the critical role of independent media, shaping our collective narratives and paving the way for a more just and equitable world. Our esteemed speaker, Margaret Kimberley, is a formidable force in the world of journalism and activism. As the executive editor and a senior columnist of Black Agenda, a report, she has fearlessly championed the case of social justice and equality, lending her powerful voice of underrepresented communities and shedding a light on pressing issues that demand our attention. Margaret's dedication to the promoting peace and challenging the status quo extends beyond her work as a journalist. Her involvement as a coordinating committee member of the Black Alliance for Peace and Administrative Committee, member of the United National Anti-War Coalition, reflects her commitment to advocating for peace and dismantling the structure of violence and oppression. Furthermore, Margaret Kimberley's contributions to independent media extends to role of director and members of Consortium News, a platform known for its dedication to providing unfiltered perspectives on global events. Her work at the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation underscores that unwavering commitment to fostering a world that values diplomacy, cooperation, and mutual understanding. In recognition of her unwavering commitment to uncompromising journalism, Margaret was honored with us. So today we are privileged to have Margaret Kimberley's Grace, our conference stage to discuss the sustainability of independent media. Her insightful perspective and profound experience in journalism and activism will undoubtedly inspire successive generations to engage critical questions, the status quo, and work collectively toward a brighter future. So let us warmly welcome Ncea, or comrade, Margaret Kimberley, as she imparts her wisdom and vision on the vital of the independence media and shaping of a more informed, compassionate, and just society. Together, let's aspire by her unwavering commitment to truth, peace, and the pursuit of a more equitable world. كلنا بتعقيد
Black Agenda Report ዝበሃል ኩሉ ሻዕ ምሳና ኣብ ጎንና ደው ኢሎም ኣብቲ ንገብሮ ናይ ሚድያ ቃልሲ ቀጻሊ ተሳትፎም ዝገብሩ እዮም ቅድሚ ሕጂ ትዝክሩ ተኮይንኩም ኣብ ክልተ ዋዕላ ሓንሳ ኣብ ዲሲ ሓንሳ ድማ ኣብ ዩሲ ዴቪስ ዝነበረ ሕጂ ካባና ብሞት ተፈልዩ ዘሎ ግሌን ፎርድ መፅኡ ተሳቲፉ ነይሩ ንዑን ድሙቕ ጣቂት
Good morning. I don't think I've ever gotten a musical interlude and an introduction. That was lovely, and thank you so much for your kind words. I'm hoping I followed the pop stars, so I hope that people are still able to listen to me. So I'm here to discuss the sustainability of independent media. All right, thank you again. Thanks so much. I first have to thank Elias Amare for inviting me and for the very kind hospitality that he and others and the planning committee and others that I have met here have extended to me. It's a great honor to be asked to speak for this event, the National Conference of Eritrean Americans. I want to talk about Glenn Ford. I hope his photo goes up. I could do no worse than to have Glenn looking down upon me, as I'm sure he always does. He was, as you all know, a great friend to Eritrea and to the Eritrean people and to the struggle for self-determination. And that's the importance of independent media, which is sustainable and is very vital, because without it, we would know nothing about Eritrea. Glenn Ford passed away 2 years ago on July 28th. And he meant quite a lot to me, not just professionally. His support of me as a person helped me to grow to become a journalist. And he supported me and all African people. I like to say jokingly that, or maybe not a joke, that Glenn Ford was the blackest person I knew. His concerns were always for African people all over the world. And that is one of the reasons why he insisted that we cover Eritrea in the way that we did. Last year, I said this about him as we honored him, as we do every year on the anniversary of his passing. Quote, "In the best sense of the word, a journalist is someone who brings to the public sphere accurate, well-sourced information and rigorous analysis. Those individuals speak for the marginalized, who can't speak for themselves, and they expose the privileged, who are always given opportunities for expression. They point out the faults of those deemed too authoritative to be questioned. If an outlet claims to write all print, as the New York Times does, or declares that democracy dies in darkness, as the Washington Post does, their work should be given more scrutiny than credibility. The journalist should be truly independent and skeptical of official narratives, and Glenn Ford was such a person. His decades of work provide a blueprint for anyone who wants that word to have real meaning and integrity," unquote. Black Agenda Report was founded in 2006 by myself and Glenn Ford and also the late Bruce Dixon. And we say, and we meant, news and analysis from a black left perspective. And we meant black and we meant left. And Black Agenda Report wrote about Eritrea when literally no one else did, as was the case with many other issues, and that tells us why independent media is so important. As I said, we pay tribute to Glenn every year around the time of his passing. And this week we reprinted an article he wrote in 2019, which was entitled, "Don't Believe What the Media Say About Anything." And that was true a few years ago, and it's true today. Yes. We also, tomorrow on Black Agenda Radio, we are also presenting President Afwerki's remarks that he made, now very famous remarks that he made in Russia, and a Glenn Ford interview in 2015 about the lies told about Eritrean migration. And in all of these instances, we see the hand of corporate media. And corporate media work hand in hand with the state. They follow their orders. They repeat their narratives word for word on Eritrea and on other issues. And that means that most news in this country is just war propaganda, if you're talking about international issues such as U.S. policy towards Eritrea. So what would a non-Eritrean, I mean, you all know about your country, obviously, but people who are not from your country, if it were not for Black Agenda Report, what would people think about Eritrea? What are we told? It's authoritarian. It's a dictatorship. People are kept in servitude. Everyone crossing the Mediterranean is Eritrean. In fact, half the country has left, apparently. Eritrea works with al-Shabaab. It's a terrorist country, etc. And it's just one of the topics that I learned about as a result of writing for Black Agenda Report and my affiliation with Black Agenda Report and with Glenn. I just want to say that I think my own story tells us that we all can learn. I wasn't always knowledgeable. I thought I was, but I wasn't, because I was depending on the New York Times and what I'd learned in college to determine what was happening in the world. I wasn't always a leftist. I grew up in a household like most black people, with Democrats, leftish Democrats, I guess you could say. But I didn't know as much as I thought, and I am still learning, and that's, I think, another important thing to know. And many times over the years, and now, even now, as I work with the editorial team myself, we accept articles, and I always say, I didn't know that about a certain place in the world or a certain event. So I mentioned President Afwerki's remarks when he was in Russia, when he met with Vladimir Putin. And I just want to talk about that summit, the summit with African leaders. What did the corporate media say about it? First, they said, well, only a certain number of leaders came, so only 17, and more African leaders showed up at the summit that Biden called last year. But we know also that the US pressured African governments and told them not to go. But that's not something we are ever told. And the president's remarks were very important, because he didn't just talk about Africa. He talked about Ukraine, about the real cause of the conflict, that this was a war between Russia and the West. Let me drink it. And even when we're told anything about African nations, whether it's the Russian summit or anything else, what are we told? We were told that Vladimir Putin is depriving African countries of grain because he backed out of this problematic agreement with Ukraine. But they never tell you that the West insisted that every nation sanction Russia at the beginning of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, and deprived African countries of the ability to pay for grain and fertilizer that they needed from Russia. So that's never mentioned, the impact that the West's actions had on African nations. So we have a very important event which is not covered at all, or covered with a great deal of bias in favor of the U.S. and its allies, and nothing about the importance of why leaders went there, what President Afwerki said, and why it was so important. I want to talk about sanctions, which are economic coercive measures is the correct way to describe them, but I will say sanctions because that's how they're understood. I recently was in Venezuela, and I'll talk about that connection with Eritrea. I was in Venezuela last week with the International People's Tribunal on U.S. imperialism, sanctions, blockades, and economic coercive measures. And Eritrea has also been a subject of their work. They've been holding hearings all year, and I was asked to be a jurist in Venezuela. So there was a week-long fact-finding trip and culminated in a day of hearings last Friday. So I think it's important to remind people what sanctions do. So when we're told that the US or the EU or the UN, or all of them perhaps, sanction Eritrea, what does that mean? I think people think that it means you couldn't open a bank account in Eritrea or something like that, but that's not what they do. They actively prevent targeted nations from doing business with other nations. And the US uses its power, its control of international institutions, the domination of the dollar, not only to punish the targeted country. So Eritrea is restricted in its ability to conduct financial transactions, to purchase things that are necessary and needed, medical equipment, infrastructure equipment, food, medicine. All of those things are restricted. But the U.S. also targets any country that says they will not pay attention to the sanctions. So if country X says, we don't care what the U.S. says about Eritrea, we'll do business with Eritrea, then the U.S. targets that country as well. So U.S. sanctions are, in effect, international sanctions. And there are some 40 countries that are targeted in this way. Approximately 28% of every person on earth is living in a country that's targeted by the U.S. It could be Eritrea or Zimbabwe or Venezuela or Cuba or Iran or the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, on and on and on. We could list the nations. And on the trip to Venezuela, on this fact-finding mission, one of our trips was to a hospital, a children's hospital, a cardiology hospital, in fact, in Venezuela. And it's called the Latin American Children's Cardiology Hospital. And at one point, before the U.S. Prevented Venezuela from selling its oil and targeted it with sanctions, this hospital served children not just in Venezuela, but throughout Latin America, the Caribbean, and even African nations. So it's one thing, and that's why it's so important, I believe, to see for one's self. It amplifies our understanding. The doctor who runs the hospital told our group that one of the things they don't have are saws. That's how you open I hadn't thought about this, but if you do heart surgery, you have to open the chest. And they should have 4 or 5 saws in order to perform heart surgery on children. Currently, they have none. And so they are using scalpels to open the chest wall, which is not what you're supposed to do. countries are not allowed to send their equipment or to supply parts. And so this hospital, which did such great work, now is impacted in its ability to serve sick children. In fact, there was a study which showed 50,000 Venezuelans died as a result, a direct result of U.S. sanctions. And those numbers are shown throughout the world. That study was done about Venezuela, but the same goes for any other country, such as Eritrea, that's living under these restrictions. So these coercive measures are not just financial, they are in fact war, and they kill people as surely as bombs and bullets do. And they're also a war crime. The rules on war crimes, the Geneva Conventions, among other things, one of their criteria for a war crime is collective punishment of civilian populations. And that is exactly what sanctions do. So where does the media come in? Well, they come in by never saying that. They never tell people what sanctions are, or what they do, or that they violate the laws of ethics of any group of people, violate the Geneva Conventions. Corporate media repeat what they're told. And if you read the New York Times or the Washington Post or watch CNN or MSNBC or the BBC or Sky News, if they mention sanctions at all, it is to make the case for them and to leave out all of the information about their impact. So how is Africa portrayed in general, all African nations? Well, in a very racist way. It's either there's a country, a pet country, and we're told that they're all good. And that always means they do what the US wants, by the way. There's never any mention of US involvement. There's never any mention of the impact of European colonialism. If you look at a map of the Horn of Africa, you know that Britain, France, Italy, all had colonies in the region. And those impacts are being felt today. And there's never any mention of the harm done to the African continent by the West, by the US and its NATO allies. And I'll give you an example from a few weeks ago. Barack Obama, who's always on Twitter, never saying anything useful. It's not even Twitter anymore, it's X, whatever. So Obama spoke about the migration crisis in the Mediterranean, and this was after that terrible accident when approximately 500 people died, when the asylum seekers died when their boat sank. And why are so many people crossing the Mediterranean? Well, because of the forever wars in the post-9/11 era in Iraq, Afghanistan, Eritrea, Somalia, Libya, I could go on, Syria. All of these countries, people's lives have been disrupted, and approximately 35 million people have been displaced in these countries in the last 20 years. But what does Obama say in his little post? Oh, we should give attention to the Mediterranean crisis. It doesn't get enough attention, as if he had nothing to do with it. The destruction of Libya, for example, is just one example of the things that he did as president, which caused people to leave their homes as refugees and to undergo so much suffering. What's going on now in Africa? There's a coup in Niger, and the US is against the coup and is instigating other African countries, Nigeria, for example, to invade Niger. Why? Well, because people there are supportive, don't want coups. African people are like people everywhere else and want democracy and want self-determination. But in this case, they want the French influence out, Niger supplies France with uranium for its nuclear plants, but doesn't have electricity for its own people. So, but the media, what do they say? You see Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, saying we're for democracy in Africa, and this coup is a terrible thing. You know, I guess that means the U.S. wasn't behind it, because the U.S. really doesn't have any problems with coups. But we see the way that Africans are portrayed. And I want to say something else. There's a need for international solidarity beyond the borders of the countries we live in or the countries we are from. And we see on the Horn how U.S. influence is impacting a black nation here. And I'm talking about Haiti. And why am I talking about Haiti? Because U.S. stooge governments in Kenya and Rwanda say they will send troops for the impending invasion, the next invasion and occupation of Haiti. And these stooges are always praised, and they'll call Eritrea a dictatorship when it isn't, but Rwanda is a dictatorship in every sense of the word, but their president, Kagame, is never criticized. He is always praised and always held up as some sort of example. So while perhaps no one here is Haitian, but we need to know what's happening there, because it is an example of how African people all over the world are viewed and are treated by the U.S. and its allies. And I also want to say, white supremacy and racial capitalism are the organizing principles of the Western nations. And that explains U.S. foreign policy and how and why the media are in sync with them, because their interests are the same. And I also want to add, next year is a presidential election, 2024. And that's always a terrible time to try to learn anything in this country, because the corporate media work to defend and protect the political duopoly. So we have Biden claiming to be, so much better than Trump, although when it comes to foreign policy, he repeats everything that Trump did. Remember that it was Trump who moved the U.S. Embassy in Israel. Did Biden move it out? No. It was Trump who directed these terrible sanctions at Venezuela. Did Biden change that? No. In fact, the U.S. has unfortunately succeeded in stealing Venezuela's oil by picking this puppet government and claiming they're legitimate. And Citgo is going to be auctioned off in a few months. And a Canadian mining company is going to get some money, and the U.S. oil company is going to get some money. So we see that there is no difference, despite any claims that there are differences. And I know many of you are immigrants to this country, so in case you haven't noticed, let me just point something out about the electoral system in this country. It's a system run by and for the oligarchs in this country. Oligarchs is a dirty word. They'll always say they're oligarchs in Russia, some other place you're not supposed to like. But that happens here too. And the two major parties each have an oligarchic class who tell them what to do, tell them what they are going to do and what they aren't going to do. And every time you ask yourself why something has not happened that would benefit the people, there's your answer. The oligarchs don't want it to happen. And that is why I say with confidence that the U.S. is the rogue state. All the finger pointing and name calling at other countries. And by the way, any country called an enemy or an adversary, they all have something in common, one thing in common. They won't do what the U.S. tells them to do. And that's the cause of the vilification and the demonization. If you look at the world, Trump began this war, a trade war, a rhetorical war, a military buildup in Asia to counter China. Of course, Obama did the same thing before him. And now we see Biden, who, in addition to being an aggressor like every other American president, is also not very smart, so much so that he couldn't even get Xi Jinping to take his phone calls. So we have a We have a rogue state run by mediocre people and a senile president. So if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what does. So this is why we have to have a Black Agenda Report. blackagendareport.com, by the way. We have a new issue every Wednesday. And if any of you write about Eritrea or any other issues, we welcome submissions. We always are looking for new writers. I thought I would just go ahead and say that because that's true. We always are. And I'm very proud and very honored to be affiliated with people who understand the importance of truth-telling in a nation where there are so many lies that are repeated so often, and we have this country that's so indoctrinated. And if you look for articles on Eritrea that are fair, that are accurate, they always come from Black Agenda Report. Someone else may reprint them, but we did it first. And there are others too joining us. I know Breakthrough News has been to Eritrea, Eugene Perrier and others on his team. And that's why we're important, and it's also why we are under attack. You know, these platforms, I mentioned Twitter, X, whatever it's being called, Facebook, all of them, all of these platforms are very useful to us. But if you look at who is removed, who is censored, it's the left more than anybody, and the black left in particular, which tells you also the importance of our work. I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago. There are some black-oriented YouTube channels which are constantly being restricted. They're removed for a week. They can't post for a period of time. And yes, there are other outlets, but YouTube is where you get, as the saying goes, the bang for your buck. And that's why they are being removed. They don't want people to give information, to tell the public, you don't really know about Eritrea. Here's the real deal with Eritrea. They don't want you to know what's really happening in your homeland and in many other countries around the world. So I would say, I read the corporate media, so I know what the New York Times says and the Washington Post says because it's necessary to know what they say. But it is absolutely a mistake to depend on them for information. So independent media is sustainable, it's important, it's vital. We always need your support. I wanted to add something else too about elections. Some of you may be less familiar with ours, but I touched on this and I'll just say it explicitly. US aggressions around the world are completely bipartisan. Bipartisan. So US policy towards Eritrea, I'm sad to say, will not change regardless of who's in the White House. Well, it could change for the worse. You could have a new administration instigate a war in Ethiopia, but blame Eritrea, but call the country a dictatorship again. And so I think it's important to remember all of those things. So even as you pay attention, and even if you're a citizen and exercise your voting rights, I think it's really important to be honest about the limits of the system and to talk about who the system serves. Not the people of this country, not the people of Eritrea. The military-industrial complex, yes. Oil companies, yes. Mining companies, yes. Not us, not you, and not me. So I'm going to wind down now and just say thank you so much. Thank you for being supporters of Black Agenda Report. And also to repeat my thanks for this invitation and this great hospitality. Thank you so much.
you, Ms. Margaret Kimberley, for the enlightening talk. We appreciate it. Now we'll open it up for a Q&A. All right, any questions? Ncea?
Thank you, Miss Margaret. You know, I appreciate that still our friend Glenn Ford is not left with us, with you, speaking the truth, the courage that he have. He's a good friend of Eritrea, and I thank you for that and following for that legacy. And not only you, but it's also Eugene, Rania, and other. And there are so many speaks the truth and the value of the true American principles to get it in the right track. We appreciate you for what you do. With that said, you know, sometimes I don't know if it is a policy of the U.S. Department or do they really represent the American value, what is supposed to be the truth in terms of, you know, sanctioning countries like, as we speak in Eritrea, there is a sanction on the one of the organization of government supported that gives subsidy to bring essential food and medicine. As we speak, they sanctioned it. I don't know what to call it if that's not a terrorism against people that essential things that they should get, blacking that, but yet they speak about other stuff unnecessarily blackened. So how do you give us the feedback that what's going on in Mali now, and a lot of truth that people doesn't know to wise up Americans? Actually, when we speak, we feel like, you know, we're bragging, but when American other values speaks what we speak, you're actually making confirmation for us. We thank you for that. Can you just get added up a little bit on that, if you can touch it about Mali, what's going on in Africa, about our president's, you know, speech, what is actually humanity means to the purpose of the vast value of the world and what they think. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm glad you used the word terrorism because that is what U.S. and its allies do. There's no other word for it. You know, think about how they've excoriated Russia and claim they're taking food from African people. What's the U.S. that actually does that? But that word is never used. And I also want to add that I believe one of the reasons they lie is that most people would not be supportive if they knew that children in Venezuela were dying because they couldn't get heart surgery. So they have to lie, they have to get buy-in from the public, and that's why there's a need to vilify, and that of course encourages the terrorism because thanks to the corporate media, what they do is never exposed. So yes, there are all those connections, and you know, it's important to read Black Agenda Report because we do try to write about all of Africa. And you mentioned Mali and other countries. One of the things that's important to know is that they are, these nations are doing their best to kick France out of their continent. France has done a great deal of damage, even in these years of, well, it's neocolonialism, right? That's the term to use. So it bears following, and also to know about AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command, the fact that U.S. has 800 military bases around the world, including in Niger. That's why they are very nervous about this coup. So I would just encourage you to keep reading Black Agenda Report.
Hello, Ms. Margaret. Thank you for this lecture and welcome to our conference. So do you think the dollar will continue to sustain, you know, the way it is right now with all the sanctions and in the light of BRICS? And also, what kind of impact will it have on the US population if the dollar basically kind of almost falls completely?
Well, thank you for that question. Yeah, de-dollarization is not a reality just yet. The dollar is still world's reserve currency. That's probably not going to change anytime soon, but we are seeing the trends. We are seeing through the BRICS and other efforts to use other currencies in trade. So the rest of the world are chipping away slowly but surely to escape dollar domination, which is a very, very important trend. And we see how, and this is something Glenn Ford always used to say, everything they do to try to enhance U.S. domination increases the decline of the U.S. because other countries, they're not going to sit around and just be beat up all the time. So you see Russia and China closer than ever because both countries need to be protected from the United States. And they are strong enough to withstand sanctions and so forth, but what they really need and what they're really working on is ending the domination of the dollar. And that's what needs to end, is the idea that the U.S. has to dominate. Unfortunately, you asked how de-dollarization would impact the American people. It would impact us. We have the prosperity, and I say that in quotes, because of the U.S., the power of the U.S. around the world. So if the right thing were to happen, for the dollar not to be the dominant currency, it would impact people here in a negative way. And the way around that is not to dominate, to have peaceful coexistence. That's what we really need in the world. And not to think that one country has to be in charge and has to be able to bully and tell other countries what to do, but that would impact some of the interests and forces that I mentioned earlier. So I look forward to de-dollarization. At the same time, I worry about the impact it would have on the lives of working people in this country who would suffer because of the actions of their government and other powerful.
Hello. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you for your work to raise the consciousness of people of color around the world and in Africa. In your speech, you mentioned something about solidarity, the importance of solidarity among the oppressed people of the world, especially here in the United States. You know, for Eritreans, if you could shed light, you know, of how Eritreans can reach to brothers, you know, and sisters from the African American community to build this solidarity among the people. Thank you.
Well, that's something we always strive for. You know, it was kind of sad when I told people I was coming here. I'm going to speak at the Eritrean American Conference, and people would say, Eritrea, what's that? And sometimes I'd mention famous people who were from Eritrea, and then, oh, okay. I think Tiffany Haddish's her family's from there. People had that, but that was their only point of reference. And even if, as I said, if you pay attention to the corporate media, you may have heard of Eritrea, but what is said about Eritrea? Nothing that's true. Everything is provides the narrative of the U.S. state almost word for word. If you read the New York Times, it's like they just reprinted a State Department press release. It's not any different. So I think the imperative, the thing that we all must do, is to educate ourselves and to reach out to other communities as often as we can. And that's why we are Pan-Africanists. Because the details may change. The history of Eritrea is not the history of Haiti, is not the history of Black Americans, but we do have something in common, and that is the way white supremacy and racial capitalism have impacted all of our people.
Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate it. I like the title of your presentation about sustainability of independent media. My question is, what is the Black Agenda report right now doing more specific plans to expand on the independent? Thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate donations, I'll just say that. And so our goal this year is to have a steady stable of writers. So they're not scrambling to have people who are good. We don't want just filler, right? We don't want just anything. So we're expanding our operations, upgrading IT, boring stuff, I know. But we're doing all that with an eye on the future to enhance what we've already done, to continue to live up to our reputation, so that we're always a going concern. Because people look to us, it's kind of humbling sometime when people say they depend on Black Agenda Report for information about Eritrea or about many other issues that they can't find anywhere else. So our goal is to strengthen our operations, to expand, and to expand in every way.
We'll take two last questions.
Thank you very much for being with us here. My question to you is, why aren't there many agencies like yours that can speak the truth of what's going on wherever? What do they lose to speak the truth, to tell the truth, to tell the facts about what's going on wherever? Is there any reason that there aren't that many like your agency? That's my question.
So why don't others do what we do? Is that your question? Well, there are, thank you. A lot of outlets, they want access. And if you just repeat what what they say, then you have access. Then you can talk to the State Department or the White House or whomever. You're rewarded with the better job. You're rewarded with more money. There are tangible rewards to going along. There are tangible rewards to repeating the lies, to being in partnership with the state instead of being independent. That is why we need people who are really, as I said earlier, who really fit that description of a journalist, so that we have more folks who are willing to go out on the limb, so to speak, and to tell the truth. Because there are benefits that come with repeating the lies, sad to say.
One last question.
Hello, everybody. Ms. Margaret, thank you for being our conference. My question is, I wish I are here. I mean, they are with their group, but she asked me this question. Morning, she's 15. She said, we take them to Eritrea, and they know the truth, and they know about the culture. Sorry. So her question is, as in a government and over here, as in Eritrean Americans, why do they lie about Eritrea? Because one kid from her class, she's in 9th grade, so they got a project, and the project was like under kids' labor, and Eritrea is on the top. So she challenged him, and he said, nope, I got it from that God. So that means it's true. So how do I respond, or how do you respond to this kid as an Eritrean American because they born here and they grow up here and they know the truth about Eritrea. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, you can't assume that they know the truth because they're African American. You know, unfortunately, you know, the days when the black community was largely more interested in internationalism and were the one group of people who would oppose U.S. foreign policy. Unfortunately, those days are gone for a number of reasons. Our movement was attacked in a variety of ways. The media have, I believe, a bigger impact on people's, the information that people are able to get. So you can't assume that a black person will have the right politics, which is sad to say. There was a time when that was more likely to be true. But I would just say it's an opportunity, and it can be difficult to try to tell people that they don't know what they're talking about. Nobody wants to hear that, right? Nobody wants to be told that they're wrong. But I find if you say, you know, there's other information about Eritrea, and this is what I would hope you would look at and understand that the information you've been getting is not always accurate. I find that could be a helpful way to put it, but sad to say there are people among us who will repeat what the corporate media and the state tell them.
I said one last question. Hands up. Sorry. To your left, Margaret. Sorry, I said one last question, but I'll give another
There's
person
one
a
more.
chance.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have time.
Thank you for the presentation and your friendship with Eritrean people. My question is, do you think it's the hostility of the United States toward Eritrea, is it because few individuals in the State Department, or is it the policy? I know the policy is not fair, but especially to Eritrea, they are extremely hostile and they don't like to positively engage with Eritrea. Is it because of those few individuals in the State Department? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. It is because of individuals, but why do people, who gets to be in the State Department? Who gets to climb the ladder? It's the person who goes along, the person who already accepts the narrative, and the person who wants to make it a reality. If I had to sum up why there's hostility towards Eritrea, it's because Eritrea insists on its independence, insists on self-determination, and will not do what the U.S. tells it. And any country that does that becomes a target. And who goes into the State Department? The elite, people from the elite classes, from the quote-unquote best schools, who are where they are because they go along, because they don't rock the boat, because they don't question, because they don't want to hear any other narrative, and they will shut you down if you provide one. I want to tell you a quick story. Last year, around the time of the African Leaders Summit in Washington, I got this email from the State Department. Do you want to cover the summit? And then it said, please send us links to your articles on this topic from the last 6 months. And I said, not only are they not going to give me a press pass, but they may call the FBI, so I didn't even bother. And that is the way that this point of view is enhanced and encouraged. They make sure they do everything they can to shut down anyone who's going to say anything. Thank you all so much.
No, اشتاق في قدرنا بالملك سلام الاسنان